You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 105. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the podcast. It's Paula here, and I'm so glad that you've decided to join me here this week. Today's topic is how to deal with a stressful week. And I'm so excited to share some tips and tricks with you to help you navigate your stressful weeks. This is something I think we can all relate to, and maybe you've just gotten off a series of stressful weeks. Maybe you're in the middle of a stressful week right now as you're listening. And if that's the case, I hope that what we have to talk about today will really help you navigate that stress with greater peace and purpose and ease. Now, one of the reasons that I'm so keen to talk to you about having a stressful week is that I myself am smack dab in the middle of a stressful week. Wednesday is the day that I typically submit my podcast episodes, and it is Wednesday at about 5 o'clock. And it's been a very, very busy week, which I love. And it's also been stressful in some ways. And I'll get to talking more about that. And one of the items on my agenda this week, which I absolutely loved, was a talk that I gave at a law firm today about managing stress. And so you can see how meta this really is, because for the last few days, my head has been thick in my stress materials, the materials that I think are the most effective when it comes to managing stress. And at the same time, I've been applying those very same techniques to myself as I've been going about my week. So I thought for today's episode, why not dive into some of the techniques and strategies that I find really helpful, because chances are, if I find them helpful, so will you. And I understand that for each of us, a stressful week will look very different. Now, in a legal practice, your stressful week typically involves a lot of emails, some deadlines. It involves perhaps court appearances. It involves perhaps some closings. It may involve some difficult conversations. It might involve some choices between priorities in your personal life and priorities at your work life. And so these are all very relatable. If I were to explain to you what kind of stresses I've had in my week, they are very similar. I've had presentations to deliver. I've had applications to submit for speaking engagements. I've had meetings where I've been coaching my clients. I've had a lot of admin and email to do. And those types of, they're not really surprises. I don't really know how to describe them, but those things that crop up in the day to day that weren't on your agenda, but that you need to deal with pretty much the day of. So that's what my week has looked like. I've also had online presentations. I've had in-person presentations and engagements that I wanted to go to. And of course, family commitments as well. So one of the reasons I'm recording this podcast episode at this time of day is because I just got back from my daughter's track meet. And as I'll explain, I wasn't able to go to the whole track meet, but I was there long enough to see her do her long jumps, which was amazing. And so what I'm going to talk about today, I think will be really, really relatable to all of you, because I'm going to talk about the techniques that I've been using. Again, I'm going to offer a number of tips and trips, 10 in total. And I'm going to start with 5 techniques that are kind of the how. This is probably what you're expecting to hear in today's podcast episode. What are the bullet points, action items that you can take when you have a stressful week? And I'm also going to share 5 suggestions that are more in the nature of coaching or mindset. You might think of it as the how versus the who. And in a sense, I think of it almost like a Trojan horse. So The Trojan horse concept, of course, is that you show up in this Trojan horse and the person at the door thinks they're getting one thing, a horse. And inside, at least as far as that legend went or the war story went, there were a bunch of soldiers hidden in this horse that was supposed to be a gift, I believe, to the city of Troy. And so the horse shows up and then all these surprise soldiers come crawling out of the horse. And it's kind of similar here, right? There's the how to deal with a stressful week, and that involves things like time management. I'll offer those suggestions in a moment. But then the soldiers inside of the horse, the things that you might not expect, that's the mindset piece. That's the who piece. And so I'm really excited to share this episode with you and to have segregated these two strategies into different categories. And I think this will be a really helpful episode for anybody who is navigating one of those difficult weeks, one of those rocky periods. We have them where your schedule is really full. There's a lot of pressure on your shoulders. You want to do a great job. And here you are. So let's get started with tip number 1 is planning. So when I have a busy week, the first thing that I do is I sit down and I plan. I plan in a way that allows me to capture everything that is on my to-do list. Now, I've got lots of podcast episodes about time management and planning. I think the first episode in this series about executive function and time management is probably your best bet if you want more information about how to plan. But in a nutshell, what I do here is I just put everything on a list and then I slot it into the most appropriate time zones. And so this allows me to have a track record of all the things that are on my to-do list so that I don't lose track of anything. At the level of your executive functioning skills, what this does is it frees up your working memory. And that means that you spend less time kind of ruminating, or your brain spends less time having to maintain those open tabs. You might think of your computer screen and how you have multiple tabs open at any given time. Well, if you're doing that to your brain by having all those activities kind of running on separate programs, you're kind of wearing out your battery. So instead of wearing out your battery, let's put it onto paper. Let's see what we're dealing with. Often when you do that, it's less overwhelming than you think it is. And so that is absolutely step 1. I want to make sure that I have on paper a place where I know all of the things that I have to do. Now, if you're not a paper person, you might have a different way of documenting. You might have a Word document. You might have an app. You might have one of those Excel spreadsheets. Everybody has a different way of doing this, but I recommend having a single place where you have all of your items. Now, the next point, once you have everything on your list and you can plan it, right? I think the trick with a busy week is that you're going to have to plan it. You're going to have to sketch it out and know roughly where things are going to go. But what is invariably going to happen in your busy week is that things are going to get moved around. So step 2, suggestion number 2, is to be flexible. That is what is going to allow you to survive your stressful week and to get everything done. So if I want to give a couple of examples of how flexibility has played into my weeks, or at Wednesday, yesterday, for example, I really wanted to go see a friend of mine who was speaking at an in-person event downtown. Now, I could also register by Zoom, but I'd already registered to go in person. It was really important to me to go and see her in person. I wanted to so badly. And when the day as the day went on and I dealt with the things on my plate and I knew of the preparation that I wanted to do for my presentation today, I realized there's no way that I can do that. It would take 2 extra hours of travel time plus, probably just because of the dynamic of being in person, versus 1 hour on Zoom. And I thought, it's not 100%. It's not exactly what I want to do, but it's what I need to do in this moment. So instead of going to the in-person event, I did the virtual event. So that's an example of being adaptable in my schedule. Now, of course, with that extra time, I was able to put some other things into those time slots that then became available. Now, another example of where I needed to exercise some flexibility was this morning. So today I had my presentation, as I mentioned. So that was an in-person presentation at a law firm. And so there were a number of things that I needed to do to prepare for that. And I also had a number of things that I needed to do just in terms of the running of my business. Today is the day I sent out my newsletter. I do a weekly post on LinkedIn. And so what happened this morning, which was totally unexpected, as these things tend to be, is our power went out. Our power went out just as I was taking the kids off to school. Now, as it turns out, there was a fire. A house, not the whole house, but near where my children go to school, a couple of blocks away, there was a fire at a house. What had happened was a tree had fallen onto a power line, and caught fire. And so in that person's yard, the tree caught fire, and I gather their garage caught fire. And so as I went to drop the kids off at school this morning, I noticed this hazy cloud of smoke. I thought, oh my gosh, is that the forest fires? Because there have been forest fires in regions not that close to us, but close enough that the smoke has been kind of blowing into our direction. And it was almost like walking into this apocalyptic scene. So here I was taking my kids to school. There was smoke and I was trying to figure out what was going on. Is the school going to be open? Is it going to be closed? Anyways, luckily the fire was under control and it was business as usual. The kids were able to stay at school safely. And, I went home after dropping them off thinking, okay, I guess I'll go back and get ready for my presentation. But of course I had no internet because the power was out for, about an hour and a half. So what that meant was if I looked at my to-do list, I had to recalibrate my to-do list based on what was available to me. The internet was no longer available, so that ruled out a bunch of the things that I did want to do, but I was able to focus on the activities that didn't require the internet. And one of the reasons I was able to do that was because I had that list of all the things I needed to do. So I was able to kind of shuffle things around and focus on the tasks that I was able to get to because they didn't require the internet. So you can see where I'm going with this. When you have a stressful week, if you take a step back, you want to take inventory of all the things that you have to do, and you want to be prepared to be flexible. You want to be prepared for the fact that your schedule is very likely not going to go to plan, and that is perfectly okay. Now, the third thing that I recommend when you're having a stressful week is to stay focused on actions that will move you closer to your goal. So what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that you want to spend as much time as possible in productive work instead of things that are not productive. Now, two areas where this can sometimes come up might be procrastination. So sometimes there's that feeling of overwhelm. Maybe you can relate to this. It's like there's so much on your plate, you pretty much shut down because you just don't know where to start. So instead of getting started, you find something else to do. You go grab a snack, you go walk to the store because you all of a sudden remember you really need a spatula or, a new pair of runners, or you go and you talk to a friend, a colleague, because you really need to check in about something. So you might find ways to procrastinate. And of course, if you're procrastinating, you're not taking actions that will get you closer to the goal that you have. And it's actually going to give you less time to execute on the work that you need to do. And that is going to further contribute to your stress. So when I know that I've got a week where it's jam-packed, I try to spend as much time as possible engaged in the activities that are moving me forward and as little time as possible in those activities that aren't moving me forward. So for me, some of those activities might be procrastination. I work really hard to not procrastinate. I rely on the tools that I teach when I teach time management. So some of those offhand are cutting tasks into smaller pieces. So for example, if I'm preparing to give a presentation, I give myself a bullet list of all the steps that I need to do, whether it's printing out the slides, printing out the outline, reviewing the outline, creating a timetable. It might be printing up some resources. It might be running through the presentation. So I give myself a list of all the different steps. And so as I'm executing on the task, I'm checking them off. That allows me to stay engaged with the task. I find I procrastinate much less because I know exactly what I need to do step to step, and I can see where I'm at in the process. When you see that you're at step 3 out of 6, you feel like you've already got that sense of accomplishment, and getting from 3 to 6 is a lot more manageable than if you didn't have that roadmap. You didn't know where exactly you were trying to go. So number 1 is I really work hard not to procrastinate. I try really hard not to engage in distracting behavior. So I love going for a snack. That's kind of one of my things that I will do. Sometimes it's surfing the internet. Sometimes I can get a little bit lost on the internet, especially if I'm researching some obscure topic that I've all of a sudden gained a huge interest in. That can eat up some time. So I try not to do those things. I also try not to complain. I like to think, especially when it comes to work, that I am so lucky to do the work that I do. I love it. And when I have a lot of it on my plate, I try to see it as abundant and wonderful. And it is a good problem, if you want to call it a problem, to have, because that's how I genuinely feel about my professional work. And so when I'm having these stressful weeks, I really try not to complain. I might acknowledge that this is a busy week. Maybe I packed a little more in my schedule than is comfortable, but I don't complain about it. I really try not to, because complaining doesn't solve anything. Sometimes it feels really good. So if you need to have a chat with someone and get it off your chest, by all means, go ahead, but try not to spend too much time there, because the time that you spend complaining is not time that you're spending moving forward toward your goal. So that was step 3. Step 4 is to get help and delegate or let go. So get help, delegate, or let go. Sometimes when we're having a stressful week, it's because we've taken on so much. And often what we've taken on does not necessarily need to be done by us. And so whatever tasks you can delegate to any other person, I invite you to simply go ahead and delegate. And you might feel a little bit reluctant. You might feel sheepish. You might feel like, no, I really should do this. This is my job. But I'd invite you to simply let that task be someone else's tasks. And that will free you up to focus on the work that is what you as an individual must do yourself. Other things that you might do are to simply let go. So you might think of the standards that you hold for yourself. And my guess is you have standards of excellence in a number of areas in your life, professional, personal, your relationships, your health, all of the things. My guess is that you're wanting to be at a 10 out of 10 standard in all these areas, or maybe a 9. I don't know. It depends. And so sometimes in order to thrive and survive during those really stressful weeks, we need to let a few things go. So what does that look like? That means that, for example, at today's track meet, I really wanted to go and support my daughter, but I knew that if I went to the whole meet, I'd end up having a really hard time navigating the evening. I'm home alone with the kids, dinner, all of it. And so I was able to go to a part of it. I went to part of her track meet. I was able to see her do the long jump. I was super proud. I was so happy to see her. I won't get to see her do the relay race, but I did what I could. And so I let go of the perfection of being the mom who showed up early, the mom who was there the whole time, and the mom who drove her back. I just couldn't do it, but I did what I could. Similarly, you might find that there are other areas. For me, it's housework right now. My house, yikes. I really need to organize it. I need to just go through everything and say goodbye to a bunch of clothing that we've outgrown, things that we're not using. And to me, this is kind of a big task. Really, this is an area where I am truly procrastinating, because every weekend, my friend, I'm telling myself, oh yeah, I'll do it then. Every rainy day, oh, perfect, I'll do it that day. So far, it's been a few weeks, many weeks, and I still haven't really done that. But the point is that I'm okay with that, because in exchange for the messy house, I have kids that I'm spending more time with. I'm taking care of them. I have my professional work that is thriving and that I love. And if that means that we have to go for a few months in the house where it's not particularly organized, that is okay. It's a trade-off that I'm willing to make. So for you, you are going to have trade-offs that you are going to be making in terms of what you're going to let go, the standards that you're going to let drop from 90%, maybe to 50%, depending on what it is and how important it is to you. Step number 5. This is really important because this is one of those areas where you may be tempted to cut corners. And this is on self-care. During those busy weeks, those are the weeks where you might skip your exercise, where you might grab fast food, where you might not get enough sleep, where you're going to be undergoing greater pressures on yourself, greater stress. You're going to have greater output, less time socializing with your friends, perhaps less time with your family. And so you see where I'm going with this. You're basically taking away a lot of what is sustaining, what may fill your bucket. Now, your bucket might be different from my bucket. And so I don't want to assume that time with your family is going to recharge you, or that time exercising is going to recharge you. But I know for myself that these are the things that I need to do in order to lead a somewhat balanced life. Now, by balanced, I don't mean balanced all of the time and balanced perfectly, but it's balanced in the way that you must learn to know yourself and to know what you need in order to continue to keep serving. So that whole oxygen mask first thing, we need to make sure that you've got your oxygen mask on. So what does that look like? For me, that means self-care. And some of the things that I find most recharging is exercise. So I typically get up very early, usually around 5 o'clock in the morning, to do exercise, whether it's a run, whether it's a workout in my backyard. I do something because it's really important to me and it makes me feel good for the whole day. Nutrition. Are you taking care of your nutritional needs? So yeah, it's fine if you're going to have meals that don't really feel all that great from time to time, but are you by and large feeding yourself with fuel that is going to sustain you? Time spent with friends, social time outdoors, time walking. To me, one of the biggest gifts I can give myself if I'm having a busy day is to go for a 30 or 40-minute walk. It is absolutely rejuvenating. It resets my mind. It stimulates creativity. So I invite you to think about what are some of the pockets of time that you can start weaving into your very busy schedule that are going to allow you to maintain a certain level of peace and calm. Pockets of that, even though the balance of your week is going to feel stressful. So those are the action items that I promised. Number 1, plan. Use those checklists. Make sure you've got everything in one place, and then you can start playing with those items and scheduling them effectively. Number 2 is to adapt. So know that your schedule is likely going to shift and change, and there will be surprises, unexpected, perhaps unwelcome, and that's okay. You're able to deal with them. Number 3, stay focused on activities that move you closer toward your goal and not on those activities that will not move you any closer, that it will in fact potentially detract you from your goal. Number 4, get help and delegate or let things go. And then 5, don't skip out on the self-care. Now, I also promised that we would talk about some of the more mindset flavored or coaching flavored suggestions. And these are really at the core of what I think are going to help you when you have stressful situations, when you have a stressful week. And the first 3 of these suggestions are suggestions that I offered during the session that I taught today to a group of lawyers. And these are what I think are probably the best tools when it comes to stress management. So the first of these tools is to get good at managing stress. And to do that, I recommend adopting a positive stress mindset. Now, I have spent the last several days steeped in the work of Kelly McGonigal, Dr. Kelly McGonigal. She is an American health psychologist. She is the author of a book called The Upside of Stress, and she has a fabulous TED Talk. You can find it if you put upside of stress as a search term. I'm not sure if that's exactly what it's called, some version of that. And it's a 14-minute TED Talk, and it is brilliant. And her whole premise is that the way that you think about stress has a direct effect on how your body responds to stress, and it impacts your choices. So some of the examples that she gives are that when you believe that stress is beneficial, when you are convinced yourself that your pounding heart, your fast breathing, that feeling of stress, that surge of energy, that those are factors that help you rise to the challenge and focus and do what you need to do to succeed in a situation, that your body will respond to that stress differently. It will affect the way that your blood vessels dilate. What they've found is that relative to a stress response where you don't have the belief that stress is good for you, I'm not explaining this very well, but in a normal stress response, your blood vessels constrict. When you believe that stress is good for you, your blood vessels actually stay the same. And that physiological response is very similar to what you would see in someone who's experiencing joy or courage. So that's really interesting, right? That the way that you perceive stress, the way you think about it, has a physiological effect. It also affects your body's production of a hormone, a DHEA. I cannot remember exactly the name of it. It's a neurosteroid that stimulates growth of the brain after stressful situations. And in individuals who are studied who had the belief, there was an intervention done to offer the positive stress mindset, if you will, there was an increase in level of the DHEA hormone after the stressful event. And so there's this support for the proposition that the way that you think about stress matters. It matters physiologically. And it also matters in terms of the behaviors. If you think that stress is harmful and bad, you're not going to respond the same way to stress. You're not going to necessarily go in and start problem solving. You're less likely to accept it. If you believe stress to be bad, then chances are you're going to try to avoid stressful situations. You might turn to alcohol or other substances in order to avoid the feeling of stress. And so, number 1, to deal with a stressful week, a stressful situation, I highly encourage you to adopt a positive stress mindset. And to do that, I invite you to think about how stress is helpful, how it is helpful to giving you the energy and focus that you need to achieve your goals. And I'd invite you to check out Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk and read her book if this is something that interests you. You might also go back to one of the podcast episodes that I recorded earlier called How to Thrive Under Pressure. I refer back to Dr. McGonigal's work there as well. And so this is a really powerful tool that will completely transform the way that you process stress. Without having to change anything around you, you can process it better. The second strategy that I have to offer when it comes to managing stress is to pay attention to that voice inside your head. I think we've all heard about the inner critic, negative self-talk. Humans all have a bias toward the negative. It's programmed in our DNA to help us survive in the world. When we perceive a threat, we're on it, we see it, it's there, and we can deal with it. And lawyers in particular have a heightened negativity bias, perhaps because they are drawn to the type of work that lawyers do, but also because lawyers are rewarded for negative bias. When you spot a typo in an email, when you spot the problem with a proposed transaction, that's something that you get rewarded for. So to be mindful of the fact that you have a brain that is oriented toward the negative and that you're feeding yourself thoughts. We have about 60,000 thoughts a day, and you're feeding yourself thoughts, some of which are negative thoughts, and some of those thoughts will really stick and get in the way of your stressful week. This is where I invite you to get really good at identifying those thoughts and dealing with them. So you may have heard of common thought distortions, automatic negative thoughts, aka ants, unhelpful thinking styles. These are all ways to describe a category of thoughts that are simply not helpful, and they are often not true. Some of those categories include all or nothing thinking. They include should statements. They include mind reading, when you think you know what someone else is thinking about you, even though they have said nothing, jumping to conclusions. There's a whole list of them. And if you look up that search term online, you'll see a bunch of different categories. And so what I invite you to do there, this is something that we talked about in today's session, is to think of the thoughts that come to you when you're in a stressful situation. Maybe the thought is, it's too late to ask for help. I should have seen this sooner. I should know this already. Whatever that statement is that you're telling yourself, you get to look at that statement and then give it a label, right? Okay, that is all or nothing thinking. If I'm telling myself it's too late to ask for help, I've arbitrarily assigned a point in time where it's too late. And we know that that is not true. You can always ask for help. You might think of that as well. Sometimes we think, okay, well, I'm going to start that project tomorrow. And then tomorrow rolls around and you're in the middle of tomorrow and you've got other things going on. And maybe you waste a little bit of time. Maybe you have projects that come in that you really cannot ignore. You get to the end of the day and you've done nothing on that project. And so you say, well, I guess I might as well give up and start tomorrow. This is that kind of all or nothing thinking. Maybe there is one thing that you could do that day that would set you up for success the following day. So what I'm inviting you to do here in this particular part of the strategy to better manage those stressful weeks is to be really aware of the thoughts that are running through your mind, to write them down if you can, give them a label. This is black and white thinking. This is a should statement. And then what I invite you to do is inquire into the truth of those statements. Is it actually true? Chances are that statement is not even true. And then I invite you to diversify your portfolio of thoughts and think about what else is equally true. For example, if you're thinking there's not enough time, maybe an equally true thought would be, there's still time for me to do what I need to do. So you get to play with that. So that is a second strategy that I would offer. The first was to work on your stress mindset, and I highly recommend the work of Dr. Kelly McGonigal to do that. And then the second is to speak kindly to yourself and to be really systematic about dealing with the automatic negative thoughts that spring to mind for you. Now, the third strategy that I would offer is to feel your stress. The first two strategies are very much in your head. These are cerebral. This is mindset. These are thoughts. And where I think we have so much leverage is in our feelings. As lawyers, feelings aren't always given the attention, perhaps, that they deserve. I know for myself, I was very much focused on the facts. If it doesn't belong in an affidavit, it doesn't belong here in the conversation at all. And so instead of being tied to the facts, what I invite you to do is to get to know the feelings of stress that you have. So a few things that you might do is simply to assess how much of that feeling you have. So if you think, okay, I feel stressed, on a scale of 1 to 10, how stressed do you actually feel? That's a way of gauging in your body how intense that feeling is. You can also use colors. So you might think of a stoplight. There's red, which means stop. That might mean, there's a huge amount of stress. You're totally frozen. You don't know what to do next. Yellow might be, oh, this is okay. There's a little bit of stress holding me back, but by and large, I can keep going. And green might be free and clear. I don't have any holdbacks. I'm just ready to go. So give yourself that opportunity to assess where you're at and to gauge what your levels of stress are. Other things that you can do is to name the feeling. First, I think for each of us, we might have a different way of describing the feeling. And so maybe it's stress, maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's frustration, maybe it's fear, maybe it's dread, maybe it's overwhelm. And so what I invite you to do here is get really specific about the word that you choose to describe the stress that you're feeling. This helps you get to know it better. And it also helps to give you distance between yourself and the emotion that you're feeling. So once you've given your stress a name, then I would invite you to ask yourself a few more questions, such as, where does the stress show up in your body? Is it a tightness in your chest, in your shoulders? Is it a sense that you have in your gut? Ask yourself, more questions. What does it look like? What color is it? What texture is it? Is it moving? And then I'd even invite you to ask yourself what that stress is trying to tell you. And how has it helped you in the past? Now, if you want to go through this exercise, I also offer a version of that in a previous podcast episode called How to Deal with Anxiety. And this is a really effective way of actually getting to know the emotions that you feel and to develop more of a relationship with them so that when you do feel stress, when you feel dread, when you feel overwhelmed, you're not so busy trying to resist or avoid that emotion that you can simply process it, allow it, feel it, and then move forward with what it is that you need to do. And yes, it does require an investment of time. You might need to spend 5 minutes, but once you've done that, then you can move forward with the items on your list. So that's step number 3. Step number 4. And I realize that we have a lot of items on our list, 10 items. So good for you. We're almost done. That is to visualize. And it's so fun because this morning I was getting ready for the talk that I was giving, and I was thinking about visualizing. And I'd recently heard a podcast where the guest was talking about visualizing himself on stage and how he imagines what he would do if all of a sudden the slides weren't working. So I thought, oh, okay, I guess I'll think of that. I imagined myself at this presentation that I was giving today. And I thought, okay, what if something went wrong? What if the slides weren't working? And I thought, okay, this is probably what I'd do. I'd keep going, or I'd find a way to use the materials that I already have to, find a way to carry the conversation. And what's so interesting is that is not what happened today. That was not the surprise that came my way. What did happen was, of course, the school, dropping my kids off at school with this bizarre fire in the background and the power going out. That was something that I could not have anticipated. There was something else. I think there was a lot of traffic on my way downtown. I had to get out of my taxi and walk the sort of final blocks to the session that I was teaching, which was not great. It wasn't bad, but these are the areas where something happens and you don't anticipate it. But I felt that because I'd done that visualization, I'd imagined what would have happened if something had gone wrong during the presentation. It's almost like I'd prepared myself for how I wanted to act when something, maybe not the exact thing that I imagined, but when something went wrong. So I invite you to do that. I think it's a really powerful visualization because what you're doing is you're taking yourself into the future where you come face to face with a problem and you see how you want to deal with the problem. You want to stay calm. You want to stay solution focused. You want to stay focused on achieving the goal, whatever that happens to be. And so I invite you to do that because I think that visualization is really helpful because then when you're navigating your week, your stressful week, you can do it from a place of feeling more confident and feeling like you already know what you're going to do. Now, the 5th suggestion in this category is trust. And as I was driving back from my daughter's track meet, I was thinking about how I still wanted to record this podcast today. I was thinking about a number of emails that I haven't responded to. I was thinking about a glitchy admin thing that has come up that I'll need to deal with. And I just thought, I'm going to trust that this is all happening exactly as it should. And when I told myself that, I felt this great sense of relief. So for you, when you're in those weeks and it just feels so stressful, I invite you to simply trust that everything is going to work out exactly the way that it should, exactly the way that it needs to. So those are the suggestions that I have to offer. If you are having a stressful week, here are 10 ideas. Number 1 is to make your plan, put it all on paper or whatever device works best for you. Just have it all in one place. Be adaptable. Stay focused on tasks that get you closer to achieving your goal. Get help or delegate or drop your standards, and don't skip out on self-care, or to put it positively, do things that fill your bucket. In terms of the second category, the who, number 1, focus on your stress mindset. Do what you can to develop a stress mindset so that you view stress as something that is helpful to you as opposed to something that you should run away from. Number 2 is to speak kindly to yourself and to deal proactively with the automatic negative thoughts that might be cropping up and getting in the way, making your stressful week that much more stressful. Number 3 is to really allow yourself to feel the stress and to get better acquainted with it instead of resisting it or pushing it away. Allow it and get to know what that feels like. Create a bit more of a relationship with it, and that will allow you to move forward even when you feel that sense of stress with greater ease, without so much resistance. And then visualize. So imagine yourself facing obstacles and overcoming obstacles, and that will help prepare you for when those obstacles truly do show up in your path. And then finally, trust that everything is going to be okay. And as I think about this, and before we wrap up, there is one last suggestion, and that is this, that if you are having a stressful week, first and foremost, I just want you to have grace with yourself. Recognize that you are a human being and that you are doing incredible work, that you have committed to excellence, that you have taken on challenges, and that you truly care about the outcome. This is one of the points that really came up today in talking about stress. Yes, sometimes we feel stress, and when we feel stress, usually it's because something that we care about is at stake. That is the definition that Dr. McGonigal uses, and that is so apt as far as I'm concerned. We don't get stressed about the things that we don't care about. We get stressed because there's something there that really, truly matters to us. And so when you feel stress, what I invite you to think about is, what is at stake here? What do you really care about? And to line yourself up with that why, and to simply keep going in the direction that feels right, that allows you to accomplish what it is that you set out to do, and to have as much grace with yourself as possible as you navigate your stressful week. So my friend, I hope that these strategies have resonated with you. I hope you feel better prepared to go about your week. And if you have a stressful week in the future, maybe you'll come back and revisit this podcast for some ideas. And I just wanted to let you know, I so much appreciate you joining me here this week. It has been a pleasure. I'm going to dive back into my week and very much look forward to completing the week. I always feel really proud of myself on Friday afternoon when I can say I did what I set out to do. And I wish that same feeling for you. So with that, I will say goodbye and look forward to reconnecting next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.